and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I am Lucifer.
And I'm Abby.
And this week we are discussing Series 10, Episode 10, The Eaters of Light by Rona Munro. This is notable for being the only time a person who has written on Classic Who has come over and written something for Modern Who.
Huh.
In this case, Rona Munro was the person who actually wrote the final episode of Classic Who, Survival.
Interesting.
And I think I don't know if it's specifically because of the classic experience or anything, but I will say that I think this episode is honestly kind of the last hurrah of just a decent normal Doctor Who episode that we get for a while.
God, that's weird to think about, but you're right.
Absolutely.
There hasn't been I guess you could say that the end of season 10 was the last good episode of Doctor Who besides Demons of Punjab. And
yeah.
So yeah, this would be the best standalone episode we've gotten in 5 years.
Yeah, and it is just a decent normal episode. It's not anything groundbreaking at all, but it's still very solid, and I like what it does. It feels like it manages to tackle a lot of ideas easily. And I think it managed, I feel like it would be the kind of thing that people would complain about, it's so woke or whatever, but I think
we did that when when this came out.
Yeah, well, I mean, so for example, it's really funny because now that I would have never been on the front of this is so historically inaccurate, SMH. But I am now, we're at the point where I'm at in my life now. I know enough to know oh yeah, no, that's actually probably right in terms of what the Roman attitude towards homosexuality was.
Indeed.
In some ways, people caring is kind of a more recent thing. But yeah, and I think it also manages to... It does a very good job of honestly portraying imperialism in a very quiet way. Because while the Roman... The representatives for the Romans that are present aren't emperors. They are people who are just as much victims of imperialism and colonization as the Celts are.
Yeah,
they're just
I think they
already
make that
assimilated.
Point.
Yeah,
they make, or not explicitly, but the fact that it's diverse. Obviously, there weren't Africans living, or there were Africans living in Rome, but they weren't ancestrally from Rome, and so it's sort of integrated diasporas of populations who have already been conquered by the Romans, presumably North African.
And I didn't remember how I didn't really remember that part at all, and I think that honestly would be my big standout thing that I noticed from this episode was just how solid that was and how it surprised me because I didn't remember that part at all. But it's really, really thoughtfully well done.
Have we had a standalone, quote-unquote, episode this series that hasn't had some theming in the way of unequal power imbalances, how that affects people?
Yeah, no, I don't think there has been.
Exactly.
Except knock knock. Well, no,
Landlords.
because there's a housing crisis angle to that. Yeah.
Landlords, yeah.
You're
So
right.
that again, just there is that level of appreciation and care and detail into putting in something that, yes, in the grand scheme of things, is this an attempt at a Monk's trilogy? No. Is this an Oxygen? No. Uh, it's just an adventure, but there's still meaning you can glean from there. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't think series 10 quite has the same level of just like, oh wow, as something like series 4 does. But I think it's incredibly consistent. Like I well, I guess the Monks trilogy kind of clunked for me, but like other than that, I think it's been an incredibly consistent series of the show in a way that I don't think we've seen. Well, no, I guess we did see it before, but like it's as much as I like Clara, it's nice to have a break from the baggage of Clara, if you get what I mean.
Absolutely.
It's and I think Bill is able to provide a more interesting perspective on a lot of these issues than Clara ever was. And I think that's something that's really to the show's benefit at this point. And I'm just, I'm forever I even when I wasn't as big a fan of Bill as I am today, I still had this thought, and I still think that's the case of like, I still now and forever wish that Bill got more than one season. I think it's criminal that she only got the one.
Yes. Even in
Yeah, I
our...
mean,
Go ahead.
yeah, I think rewatching this, I mean, I think we'd started to like Bill a lot in the last couple of years, even though we hadn't rewatched. We were just sort of reassessing our memories, but sort of coming back to it and really rewatching it, I'm definitely like, damn, it kind of sucks she only got one season because she's like good.
Yeah.
But the thing is, she
Absolutely.
doesn't get that much development in this season because it's only one season and there's not much going on in terms of her own character arc. She's just sort of getting the introduction run. And it's a shame that we didn't get like a second season with her to sort of give her more of an arc.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Definitely.
I remember at this point, back when the series was airing, even as people who sort of fell into the, I guess you could say, classical liberal pit of thinking for a hot minute and a half.
So you in 2016 and 17?
Yes, me specifically, yes, in 2016 and 2017. It's cringe, okay? It's cringe and it's bad.
I remember that arc. That was a weird time for all of us, to be fair. But like,
it was a weird time for all of us. So, but anyways, even at that shallow point in my time of thinking, Bill had won me over. This episode has so many good interactions that aren't top tier. The side characters are good. The CGI is like, you can tell they sort of ran out a bit, but it's like,
no, you can tell they ran out. It was really funny.
But it's still at a point where even as early as like 2005, you can, there's that camp and charm to it. So yeah.
Even if the fucking the titular Eaters of Light remind me of that fucking, I don't know how hooked in you are to like Sonic Twitter. I am, because I'm interested in the games and because I follow Elise on Twitter, but I don't know how hooked in you guys are. But there's a fucking screenshot from the most recent Sonic game that has just like a dead on perspective of a squid like creature with the title Squid beneath it, and I couldn't not think of that every time I saw the titular Eaters of Light, and it made me laugh.
That's a good meme.
Squid Games.
Oh,
indeed.
this is a random factoid coming out of the depths of hell at me, but the main, I believe it's the main Roman guy, is in Star Wars The Force Awakens. So
Yeah, I saw his face. I don't think he's familiar because of Force Awakens, but I kept looking at this guy and being like, he looks so familiar, and I think some of it is because he looks like kind of like Quentin Tarantino.
that is true. He's the guy who's like, tell that to Conja Club, like that, in that whole stupid sequence with
Yeah,
the
I don't
roly
I don't
alien ball.
I don't remember. I don't remember who's like. I don't like. I know what line you're talking about, but I can't put a face to that. So
It's
I
that
think for
face.
me, it's more the fact that he looks like Quentin Tarantino.
That is very, very valid. So but that makes two, off the top of my head, actors in Doctor Who that have been in The Force Awakens. So that guy and Tosin Cole, aka Ryan, is also in The Force Awakens.
Ryan was in Force Awakens.
He,
What?
I suppose I'll talk about this now, since we're probably not doing.
We're not. Yeah. Since why would we? Ryan didn't bother to show up to Power of the Doctor. Why would we bother to show up for Ryan's episodes?
So true. So he is. Ryan's actor plays one of the X-Wing pilots that maybe gets like 2 or 3 seconds of screen time when they make that assault on Star Killer Base. He has a beard. He looks very different, and you don't get a lot of screen time with him. So most people, I would assume, do not know that. But yes, there are two actors of Doctor Who at least that have made it into The Force Awakens.
Woo! Let's go
Nice.
Doctor Who alumni.
Doctor Who alumni in a passable Star Wars movie.
Why not more
It's
Doctor Who
fine.
alumni in a clocky Star Wars movie? Did you consider that?
What would be a clocky Star Wars movie?
Rogue One,
Fair enough.
which a Doctor Who actress is also in Rogue One, so that's appropriate.
What would a clocky Doctor Who movie be?
Exactly.
I'm gonna go ahead and say Phantom Menace is the clockiest Star Wars movie.
Are you saying this because Obi-Wan Kenobi gives off trans mask vibes?
No, there's just sort of a vibe to it, you know?
No.
Okay. Fair enough. I'll take your word for it. Anyways. What's your opinion? What is your guys' opinion on the crow thing? Because half of me is like, oh, that feels like a pretty interesting like device that I think adds a little bit of wonder to the narrative, and part of me was literally staring at the screen when they did the reveal for that, yelling, "Fuck you."
I'm of two minds. Actually, 7 when you get down into it, but that's another topic. But it feels, knowing the context of this being a classic writer, this feels more that, if you know what I mean. And that is, and I don't mind that, because are crows a recognizable bird? Sure. But also,
it feels almost like kind of Neil Gaiman-y
yes,
in some ways. It feels like something from American Gods.
Yes.
I will say, I wonder if they decided the girl's name and then decided the crow thing, because it's not really like super integrated with the episode, and it could reasonably be like, hey, this girl's name kind of sounds like a crow sound. What if we did something with that? Or if it was the other way around and they chose her name because they were like, what if crows are saying a fucking 4th century Celtic name?
Yeah.
I enjoy as well that there are many times throughout this show And it's even lampshaded, I forget by what character at some point, that I think it's one of the Osgoods, that the Doctor will say nonsense in a situation to distract from how horrible or how fucked a situation might be. And it's just nice that one time in a situation where you could clearly say that's not true, he's just being silly, that it is actually true.
Yeah.
So there's a neat payoff there if you care about that sort of thing. So my opinion is, at best I think it's cute, and at worst I don't care.
Yeah. You know what I that was realized at the end of the episode that I was very surprised by? There is like at no point there is like no acknowledgement of the fact that this Doctor is Scottish, despite the fact that we are in Scotland.
Well, he hints at it because he's like, it's Scotland, it's supposed to be damp.
Oh, that's true. Right, but there's no point where it like matters with regard to like the Celts.
I wonder when they filmed this, like production wise.
I think they do tend to film fairly linearly, so like the first episode isn't necessarily the first episode aired, but it's usually within like the first few. So I'd imagine this was closer to the end of production. But I wouldn't know for sure.
Production order. So this was after Oxygen and before Extremis.
Huh.
Weird. Okay, that's way more out of order than I was expecting.
Which is an interesting choice.
Yeah.
I suppose if they were doing the heavy episodes where Nardole, Bill, and the Doctor were really a unit in some way, I could see that making
makes
sense with
yeah.
scheduling and such.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I feel that.
yeah.
I will say one kind of weird thing that I noticed, and maybe you guys didn't notice that as much or didn't. Well, I mean, I didn't see it as a problem, but it was like that's weird. Of like, he kind of snaps back to like Series 8 era for a bit in this.
He
it feels
does.
like
he gets
it's weird.
Really like I noticed like his speeches near the end were all like incredibly patronizing in a way that was like,
yeah,
damn, you're being kind of harsh here.
yeah. And like I don't know, maybe it's because the reveal is that he's showing off for Missy, so he's trying to not leave it for like a point where she's like, "Oh wow, you just let them like die? Wow, great job, dude." But like it feels a little bit like, I think the episode still works and it's still in line with Capaldi if you consider his entire tenure, but it does feel a little bit out of place for this season.
Yeah. Not complete character assassination, but a little OC.
Yeah. Also, it was really funny when I realized that it's really funny watching this episode and realizing, oh, yeah, they never had the TARDIS translation circuit conversation with Bill. That just never happened.
Yeah, I realized that too. And she was
Bill
like,
just has to fucking figure it out.
I love her realization. Oh, that's why everyone in space speaks English.
Yeah.
Like, that just hadn't even occurred to her until she met Romans, and then she was like, oh, well, Romans wouldn't speak English, obviously. Aliens would, but Romans wouldn't.
Yeah. Also, uh so I don't like entirely know, cuz it's been stated before that the showrunner usually does some decent amount of revision work on episodes usually. Um and they kind of serve as both an executive producer and script editor. Um But like, so we know that Romans are like one of Moffat's hyperfixations, and even though this episode doesn't have a writing credit from Moffat on it, I'm sitting here looking at it like, like one last crack at Moffat's Roman hyperfixation before we move on.
Quite possible, yes.
In which case, fair enough, man. Also, again, like, I feel it's I hate to keep like beating a dead horse at this point, especially because the dead horse has like officially passed. It's done. But like every time in this series that there is like a moment that like 12 and Missy like actually have a talk, I really feel like it's really noticeable, like the difference in quality and execution between whenever Chibnall enters okay it's time to talk mode, because just this scene, like we've had a string of fantastic end of episode Missy scenes over the back half of this season, and I think this one might be the strongest.
I really like Missy in this episode. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a okay, so her arc in this season is kind of weird because it's so back compressed, and it
Yes.
because she doesn't genuinely get introduced until halfway through the season, and that she has a whole arc before the end is kind of weird. But I don't know. I feel like they made it work because like so far I haven't like gone to an episode and been like this feels unnatural for her. It's always been like okay, I can see that. So I think
Yeah.
that they pulled that off is incredibly impressive because really it's like 6 episodes where she gets like a few minutes in each up until the last two-parter.
I also think a decent amount of it is just how well the two are able to sell it. Like, I think if they weren't, then it would have fallen apart. But the fact of the matter is that they are incredibly good at selling it.
Yes.
Capaldi
has been lucky in the chemistry for his companions. 12 and Clara worked so well. 12 and Bill is electric. It's another tier with 12 and Missy, albeit it doesn't start out like their Series 8 interaction is great. Their Series 9 interactions are pretty damn good. But the bar is raised here. And
absolutely,
this is no fault, I do not believe, of Sacha Dhawan. However,
yeah,
it is simply...
I mean, especially... Yeah, I was going to say especially because he's probably the best part of Power of the Doctor.
Indeed, yes. It's no fault of his own. It's just when the previous Doctor master dynamic is so... I'm going to repeat a word, but electric. It's... You can feel the talent on screen and the history. And with 13 and Dhawan's master, that same energy very rarely shows up, but for the majority, like I'm just thinking, even in a friendly, like no stakes conversation, like danger, active danger. At the end of this episode, there is more weight and more tension
Yeah.
in 12 and Missy's conversation than there is for the entire fucking time where the Master has 13 captive and is just expositing timeless child bullshit
Yeah.
at her.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's also it's just like it's also just unfair to whoever has to come next, because I think Sasha did an amazing job, but even then, I think, however amazing a job in the world it was, having it come after this was never going to feel like anything but a step back, unless you continued with the arc that you set up here, which isn't really what happened.
no, not at all.
So like he's very good at being like catty evil doctor. That was, that was really good and everything. But at the same time, as entertaining as it is to see him like walk into a room and be like, yeah, Lamau, your dad sucks and is dead, to fucking Kate Lethbridge Stewart, it's never going to hit quite the same way, because it requires abandoning the emotional arc that was done so well here. So, and I mean, I can't really say like, oh, they just should never have done it, because like, or I mean that they should never have brought the Master back, because like in the end, um oh, like in the end, the the Master was always going to come back. There was no way that the Master was never going to come back, and it would be silly to suggest that. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to feel like a step back.
Yeah. I do wish there had been a way they could have, I don't know, kept something there.
Yeah. Yeah, anyways, I think I feel like that's about it for me. I mean like it's another one of those episodes where and I think this has been, as much as I enjoy series 10, this has kind of been a constant, where it's like this has all been really good, but I haven't had as much to say about it as I have with other things, but it is still incredibly solid. But yeah, so that's about all I have to say about this episode. I'll let you guys say your part before we move on to ratings.
Yes. I suppose I will give this part of the spiel here. Why not? It's coming up on the finale. I think it's very, very easy to say that even though this doesn't touch the highs of Series 4, which, if I'm correctly remembering, it's either Series 4 or 1 that a lot of people have as their number one pick. It's not as good as those, because those series all have incredible highs. But if you were to ask me what I think an ideal, not super special, not super event, just an ideal business as usual Doctor Who series, I would probably point to this one. And this episode is another good marker for that assessment. It's You could argue a throwaway episode, deals with an enemy of the week. A very common writing trope in sci-fi. You see it a lot in Star Trek. So, not a very special enemy. There are good side characters that don't have the most depth, but it's there, and they interact with the main cast well. There is a good background and narrative and theming to it all, but it's doesn't particularly take the center stage that it could, I suppose. And there's some silly stuff with the crows and some genuine, like, uplifting, genre uplifting scenes with the Doctor and Missy. It's been really cool to remember this series again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Ready for ratings?
oh, are we going to ratings now? Yeah.
No. If you have a piece to say before ratings, go ahead.
No,
and say
no,
it.
no, no. I thought we were doing ratings.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I was just gonna say that, like, yeah, no, it's in some ways bittersweet, knowing kind of that we're coming to the end of, like, the period when the show was good uninterrupted. I'm hoping that we'll get a resurgence with RTD back, and I'm hoping that manages to continue after he leaves eventually. But yeah, no, it's just it's an A. I don't have much to say about it, but it's an A. It's just this it really feels like we're coming to the end of, like, when Doctor Who, like, I don't know, people say that Doctor Who kind of dipped in ratings and in views during the Capaldi era, and to some extent I think that's true. But I still think that when the Capaldi era ended, like, aside from, like, the initial rush when she was first announced, and for I don't know, the first few episodes of her first season, it kind of felt like Doctor Who just kind of disappeared and just, like, kind of kept trudging on for 5 years out of obligation and not out of a desire to do anything. But while that's sad, this episode is great. It's an A.
I may have accidentally done most of my spiel before the rating, so everything I said there, just assume that my words are brilliant enough to hear again. And we've done that, we're walking. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't even really feel like, if I didn't know that the finale was after this, I wouldn't even necessarily feel a build-up, aside from the emotional one with 12 and Missy. Everything... now I feel like I'm dying. I have COVID, in case anybody couldn't tell. I'm getting through it.
Ooh.
Yes. Everything is firing on quality cylinders. It's not the most amazing, mind-blowing stuff. It's really well constructed, however, for what it is. Just like the majority of this series, again, it is, I would say, the modern example of what a business-as-usual Doctor Who series should look like. Fantastic. Ironically, it's a fantastic point to jump in for a reboot. It's just the preceding series that kind of fuck you over in that regard. So, that's unfortunate. This episode is I forget what Aurora does. It's an A. Fuck you.
Yeah, I think it's also letters.
It's an A.
Yeah, I think this is just a really good sort of transitionary episode into the end. I agreed with Lucifer that there isn't really this sense of a build-up, which I do think works with the nature of the finale, which is sort of like, oops, I stuck my dick in a bear trap. and now things are bad. Um, yeah, so I think it works that there's just sort of like the Missy Doctor stuff that builds up to that. As for this episode, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's the monster of the week itself isn't compelling, but it doesn't really need to be. It can just work as a sort of faceless enemy to tell this different story, sort of about, I don't know, like what is this story about? It's about empire and power and memory, I guess,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I can't think of another episode that really takes a similar spin on this sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think all around it's pretty good. I would give it like a 8.5 out of 10.
All right. Next week, it's time. We're going to be talking about the 2-part finale, World Enough in Time, and The Doctor Falls. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I am not only a femboy demon, but also a homosexual. You can follow us on Twitter at Ahura Borealis.
I'm Abby, and you can find me on Twitter at Himajoshi Chaser.
And we will see you all next week.